The summons arrived in the form of a sleek courier drone, its metallic hull gleaming under the twin suns of the desert planet Ellen. Jar Thane was not in the habit of bowing to monarchs. She'd spent most of her career as a free agent, a blade for hire who answered only to the weight of credits and her own restless ambitions. But this was no ordinary request. The sealed missive bore the seal of King Malcolm II, ruler of the interstellar empire of Novell. "What would a king want with me?" Jar muttered, breaking the holographic seal with a swipe of her gauntlet. A translucent image of the king's herald materialized, his voice a blend of authority and urgency. "Jar Thane, the Blade of the Wastes, your presence is required before His Majesty in the capital city of Quire. This is not a request. Transport will arrive in 3 hours' time." Jar scoffed, her sharp, angular features twisting into a grin. "Not a request, huh?" she said to no one in particular. For a moment, she considered ignoring the summons. The thought of any king issuing her an order rubbed her the wrong way. But something about the transmission's tone, the bluntness of it, made her curious. She spent the next 3 hours preparing for a confrontation. Not a political negotiation, not a diplomatic meeting, a confrontation. Her exosuit, a patchwork of carbon plates and polyalloy panels, was more battle-scarred than pristine. She liked it that way. It told her story, countless contracts completed, scores of enemies defeated, and a long trail of victories. It told people that she was more than her name or her reputation. She was a survivor. When the shuttle arrived, a sleek craft in Royal Navy colors, Jar stepped aboard without ceremony. The attendants, all dressed in elegant black and silver uniforms, tried not to stare at her armor or the array of weaponry she carried. She let them keep their nervous distance. She had no intention of explaining herself. Hours later, as the shuttle entered orbit over Quire, Jar caught her first glimpse of the capital city. It was nothing like the dusty colonies she was used to. The skyline glittered with crystalline towers, and the planet's surface was crisscrossed with rivers of light skyways filled with anti-grav vehicles. In the center of it all stood the Royal Spire, a monumental structure that seemed to pierce the heavens. She wasn't easily impressed, but she had to admit the place had flair. Her landing pad was an open platform high on the spire's exterior. A small delegation awaited her, led by a man she recognized from the Holonet Council Vins, the king's chief advisor. He was older than she'd expected, his pale, hairless head gleaming under the platform's soft lights. "Jar Thane," Vin said, his voice cool and measured. "The king is expecting you. This way, please." The walk through the spire's upper halls was a silent one. No explanation was given, and Jara didn't ask. She took in the grandeur of the place, walls inlaid with veins of glowing ore, ceilings that shimmered like the night sky, servants and guards moving about in perfect, practiced synchrony. It all felt too controlled. Too polished. Finally, they entered the throne chamber. The room was enormous, the ceiling arched and impossibly high. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat King Malcolm II. He was not what she had expected. His appearance was almost cold, mechanical. His face was framed by an ornate, energy-wreathed crown, and his body was encased in a suit of ceremonial armor that seemed as much a machine as it was a garment. The king's voice, when he spoke, carried an artificial undertone, as though augmented by a vocalizer. "Jar Thane," he said, his eyes scanning her as though analyzing a data set. "I have heard much of your exploits. Your victories. Your unbreakable will." She crossed her arms and tilted her head, meeting his gaze with the same brazen confidence she always carried. "And here I thought kings didn't pay attention to us lowly mercenaries." A flicker of something crossed Malcolm's face, perhaps amusement, though it was hard to tell. He rose from his throne and descended the steps, each movement deliberate and measured. "I need you for a special task," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. "One that only someone of your caliber can perform." Her brow furrowed. "If you wanted someone dead, you could hire any number of assassins. What's so special about me?" "I don't want someone dead," he replied, stopping a few paces away from her. "I want you to humble me." The words hung in the air, confusing even the stoic guards stationed along the chamber walls. Jara squinted at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Humble you? You want me to what, knock you down in front of your people? Not just my people, Malcolm said, his tone firm. The entire galaxy. I am seen as a figure of impenetrable strength. Indomitable. But the enemies of this empire of my empire are growing bolder. They must believe that I, too, can be defeated. You want to stage a fight? Jara asked, her arms still crossed. Why not use one of your royal guards? Why me? Because you, the king said, stepping closer, his metallic voice lowering slightly, are known across the stars. You're the only warrior who can truly convince them that even a king can be brought low. When they see you defeat me, they'll think twice before challenging my rule. Jara's grin returned, sharp and dangerous. So, you want me to humiliate you? That's a first. What's in it for me? The reward will be substantial, Malcolm said without hesitation. Wealth. Resources. Fame. Whatever you desire. Fame I have. Wealth, I could always use more. She narrowed her eyes. But you're asking me to break you. To show everyone you're not untouchable. You sure you want that, Your Majesty? I've made my decision, he said firmly. You will fight me, and you will win. The court will gather tomorrow. The galaxy will watch. And you, Jara Thane, will be remembered as the warrior who proved even a king can bleed. Her smirk deepened. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you regret it. The announcement sent ripples across the galaxy. The renowned mercenary Jara Thane was to fight King Malcolm II in a formal duel. While some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, others saw it as a strange, calculated move by the monarch. Regardless, it was an event no one wanted to miss. High-ranking officials, corporate magnates, and curious freelancers packed into orbital pleasure yachts and diplomatic cruisers to witness the spectacle firsthand. The arena was unlike anything Jara had seen before. Suspended in the vacuum of space, it orbited Quire's largest moon, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the star-filled void. Holographic projectors spun constellations and battle replays across the dome, while shimmering light bridges connected platforms that floated freely within the zero-gravity chamber. The design was deliberately disorienting, meant to confuse challengers and create opportunities for truly dynamic combat. Jara stood at the edge of the central platform, adjusting the calibrations on her exosuit's energy stabilizers. Her armor, a mosaic of patched-together components, glinted under the artificial lights. Despite the suit's hodgepodge appearance, it was a marvel of engineering, outfitted with enhanced mobility jets, kinetic dampeners, and an old plasma-forged blade she'd carried since her early days. A voice crackled over the arena's comm system. Combatants to the central platform. She stepped forward. The crowd, though shielded from the combat zone by layers of reinforced transparent material, roared as she entered the arena's center. All around her, dignitaries and galactic nobles craned their necks for a better view, their faces lit by the soft glow of hovering holocams. Across from her, King Malcolm II descended from a polished ramp flanked by a retinue of royal guards. His ceremonial battle armor glowed with an almost ethereal light. It was unlike the traditional, rugged designs Jara was used to. This armor was sleek, with curved lines and faint, pulsing veins of light running along its surface. Malcolm carried a single weapon, a radiant, double-edged energy halberd that seemed to hum with restrained power. The king's helmet concealed most of his face, save for his intense, unblinking eyes. They locked onto Jara the moment she stepped into view. Jara Thane, Malcolm's voice boomed through the arena's speakers. Today, you will face me not as a mercenary, but as a symbol. A symbol that even kings must stand on equal ground with those who walk the stars. I offer no malice, only a lesson for all who think themselves untouchable. Sounds real noble, Your Majesty, Jara said, her voice amplified by the arena's systems. She rolled her shoulders, stretching. But let's get something straight, I'm not here to make speeches. You wanted me to fight, so I'm going to fight. Don't expect me to go easy on you. The king's expression didn't change. "I would expect nothing less." A low chime echoed through the arena. The floating platforms around them began to shift, moving in a slow, unpredictable dance. Some rotated, while others drifted further apart. The central platform held still, but Jara knew it wouldn't remain stationary for long. The arena's gravity fields pulsed once, then stabilized. The announcer's voice rang out, crisp and clear. "Combatants, prepare for engagement. The duel begins in 10 seconds." Jara took a deep breath, tightening her grip on her plasma blade. It sprang to life with a familiar hum, its brilliant blue energy crackling faintly in the vacuum. Across from her, Malcolm adjusted his stance, the blade of his halberd casting a golden glow that illuminated the patterns etched into his armor. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A loud gong reverberated through the arena, signaling the start of the duel. The crowd's cheers faded into the background as Jara launched herself forward, her suit's jets flaring bright. The king met her head-on, his halberd swinging in a graceful arc. Jara dodged, twisting midair and countering with a low strike aimed at his leg. Malcolm parried with precision, the halberd's blade sparking as it deflected her plasma sword. The battle quickly escalated. The zero-gravity environment turned every move into a spectacle. Jara's strikes were quick, precise, and unrelenting, while Malcolm's counters were almost serene, calculated movements that belied his regal demeanor. He used the arena's shifting platforms to his advantage, leaping gracefully from one to another, his armor's thrusters flaring in controlled bursts. Jara, however, was a brawler at heart. She closed the distance at every opportunity, forcing Malcolm to rely more on defense than offense. Her blade hissed as it struck his armor's energy shield, sending ripples of light across its surface. She pushed harder, determined to find a crack in his defenses. Her own armor took glancing hits from the halberd's golden blade, but she didn't let up. Around them, the audience was on the edge of their seats. What had started as a formal display of combat was rapidly turning into a no-holds-barred clash of skill and willpower. Even the dignitaries who had expected a quick, staged match began to realize they were witnessing something far more real and far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. As the battle raged on, Jara felt a shift in the king's movements. His counters grew slower, his strikes less precise. She could see the faint flicker of fatigue in his eyes. For all his regal posturing, for all his finely crafted armor and weapons, Malcolm was still human. And Jara had spent her entire life learning how to exploit even the smallest weakness. "This is what you wanted, right?" she called out, her voice carrying through the arena. "You wanted to be humbled. I can do that for you." The king's jaw tightened beneath his helmet, but he didn't respond. Instead, he raised his halberd and charged. The king's charge was ferocious, his energy halberd slicing through the zero-gravity void with precision. Jara barely had time to leap to a drifting platform as the golden blade grazed her armor, scorching the edge of her shoulder plate. She landed and quickly propelled herself back toward him, refusing to give him the upper hand. The crowd roared as their weapons clashed again, bursts of light and energy rippling outward. Malcolm's movements were disciplined, almost mechanical. Every swing of his halberd was deliberate, and his footwork, though hampered by the shifting platforms, remained impeccable. But Jara had been in countless skirmishes, against foes far less predictable than a king in ceremonial armor. She danced around his strikes, her plasma blade a blur of blue light as it sought openings in his guard. Their duel became a deadly symphony of blows. The arena's gravity fluctuated just enough to add complexity, forcing them to rely on their exosuits' jets to maintain momentum. Each platform they landed on shifted under their weight, making every step a test of balance and timing. Jara was accustomed to chaos, she thrived in it. She could see that Malcolm, despite his training, was struggling to keep up. Her strikes grew more aggressive, each one pressing the king further onto the defensive. He blocked and parried with the skill of a seasoned fighter, but Jara began to notice patterns in his defense. His shield flared at predictable intervals, and his footing, though disciplined, was not invulnerable. Her mind raced through her options. A direct assault on his shield might wear it down, but that would take time she might not have. Instead, she chose a different approach. Malcolm lunged again, his halberd sweeping toward her midsection. Jara twisted midair, her thrusters kicking in at just the right moment to propel her out of reach. She countered with a rapid, two-handed strike aimed at his shoulder, forcing him to twist awkwardly to block it. As he did, she saw her opening, a brief flicker in his energy field as his shield struggled to absorb the impact. She adjusted her stance, feinted low, and surged forward. Her plasma blade hummed with power as she brought it down in a calculated arc. Malcolm raised his halberd to meet the strike, but this time she pivoted at the last second, directing her blade toward the center of his chest plate. The impact was devastating. Her blade met the reinforced material of his royal armor, and for a moment it seemed as though his defenses would hold. But then came the crack, the sharp, piercing sound of something giving way. The crowd gasped as a jagged fracture split across his once impenetrable chest plate. Sparks flew, and the king staggered backward, clutching his chest as his armor's internal systems struggled to compensate. For a moment, there was silence. Even the dignitaries, who had watched with smug amusement at first, were now leaning forward in shock. Jara held her ground, her blade still glowing as she watched Malcolm try to steady himself. The fracture in his armor was unmistakable, a gaping wound in the image of his invincibility. Malcolm raised a hand to stop his guards, who had instinctively moved closer. His voice, filtered through his helmet's speakers, was unsteady but resolute. "No," he said. "Let it be known that she has broken my armor. And my pride." Jara kept her weapon at the ready. Something about this felt off. She had followed the king's order, but the vulnerability he had revealed, whether calculated or genuine, left her uneasy. She wasn't used to fights ending this way, with her opponent admitting defeat so readily. It felt too clean. Still, the crowd erupted into cheers and gasps, the sounds reverberating through the arena's walls. The holocams zoomed in on the shattered chest plate, broadcasting the image across the galaxy. Jara lowered her blade slowly, watching Malcolm carefully. He straightened, his breathing heavy, and nodded once in her direction. "You have done what?" Jara Thane watched King Malcolm II stagger back into the shadows, his shattered armor glinting faintly in the ambient light of the arena. The crowd's roars and cheers had become a dull background noise, muted by her lingering unease. Something about this whole affair, this lesson the king claimed he wanted to teach, felt deeply wrong. Hours after the duel, Jara stood alone in one of the spire's vast private observation chambers. Through the massive crystal glass windows, the vibrant lights of choir stretched out like a glittering tapestry, and beyond them, the endless stars. She leaned against the railing, one armored hand drumming a soft rhythm against the polished metal. Her thoughts churned. She had fought countless battles, taken down warlords, crushed pirate clans, and turned the tide of planetary wars. None of that had prepared her for this strange dance of politics and pride. What troubled her wasn't the fight itself. She'd done her job, as brutal and direct as always. No, it was the way the king had orchestrated it. She could feel the weight of a deeper plan, a hidden agenda that hadn't been spelled out. Her quiet reflection was broken by the hiss of the chamber door sliding open. Jara turned her head slightly, her expression guarded, as Counselor Venz entered. The older man's movements were deliberate, his hands clasped behind his back. His pale, hairless head gleamed in the low light. "Jara Thane," he began, his voice calm. "The king wishes to speak with you." She tilted her head, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. "No royal proclamation this time, Venz?" Venz's face remained impassive. "It is a private audience. Follow me." The two walked in silence through the spire's gleaming halls. The journey took them deeper into the royal complex, far from the grand public chambers and the prying eyes of the court. Jara kept her senses sharp, every step measured. She didn't trust anyone in this palace, least of all a man who wielded words as weapons. Finally, Venz stopped before a set of heavy doors, their surface etched with intricate, glowing runes. He gestured, and the doors slid open silently. Jara stepped inside alone. The king's private quarters were starkly different from the throne room or the arena. This chamber was smaller, more subdued, with walls lined by shelves of data tablets and ancient artifacts. King Malcolm stood near a central holoprojector, his armor gone. Instead, he wore a simple, dark gray uniform. Without his imposing regalia, he looked older, almost fragile. His shoulders were tense, his face drawn. Jar stepped closer, her boots clinking softly on the polished floor. "You wanted to see me, Your Majesty?" The king turned, and for the first time, his expression was completely open, no mask of authority, no calculated calm. "You broke my armor," he said, his voice quieter than before. "That was the job," Jar replied, folding her arms. "You gave the order. I followed it." He nodded slowly. "And in doing so, you've ensured that those who conspire against me will think twice before making their move." Jar's brow furrowed. "That's what this was about? Scaring your enemies by letting them think you're vulnerable?" The king's gaze dropped for a moment. "Yes. But also no. The truth is, I needed to remind my court, my allies, and even myself that strength does not come from invulnerability. A ruler who appears untouchable becomes a target. But a ruler who survives being brought low gains respect. Fear is fleeting. But respect, once earned through hardship, endures." Jar narrowed her eyes, studying him. "You've got a funny way of earning respect, Malcolm. Most people don't order a public beatdown to prove they're relatable." "Perhaps not," he said softly. "But I've learned that the ways of kings are rarely understood by those who walk outside the halls of power." She couldn't help but smirk. "Is that your way of calling me ignorant?" The king gave a faint smile. "Not at all. I called you here because I trust you understand more than most. You've seen the cost of power. You've lived it, and the endless battles and betrayals you've survived. That's why I chose you, Jara. Not just for your skill, but because you know what it means to rise again after a fall." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jara glanced at the holoprojector, its light casting faint patterns on the chamber's walls. She saw through the king's carefully crafted speech. There was truth in what he said, yes, but also manipulation. He had used her reputation, her skill, and her defiance to send a message. A message not just to his enemies, but to his allies, his court, his entire empire. And yet, as much as she hated being a pawn in someone else's game, she couldn't deny that the fight had felt real. In that moment, facing the king on the shifting platforms of the arena, she hadn't been performing a role. She'd been herself, fierce, unyielding, and free. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "what now? You've got your big statement. You've got your cracked armor. Is this where you shower me with credits and send me on my way?" Malcolm straightened, his hands clasping behind his back. "You will be rewarded as promised. But if you ever find yourself back in Novell, remember that this empire owes you a debt." Jara studied him for a long moment. Then she turned on her heel and walked toward the door. "Careful, Your Majesty," she said over her shoulder. "One day, someone might actually want that debt paid in full." As the doors hissed shut behind her, Jara felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. She had done her job and done it well. But the galaxy had a way of punishing those who played games with power. Time would tell whether the king's gamble would pay off or whether it would cost him everything. Jar Thane, however, had no intention of waiting around to find out. Her life was out there in the stars, beyond the reach of kings and their fragile pride. That was where she belonged.